The disappearance. If you think this story is strange now, wait until you hear what they uncovered next. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the truth this case has been hiding for decades. Rain hammered the cracked pavement outside the small police station in northern Missouri on the night everything changed. At 2:14 a.m., a dispatcher picked up a call that would mark the beginning of one of the most mysterious cases in U.S. state history. The caller was breathless, whispering into the receiver like someone afraid to be overheard. All she said was, "You need to send someone to Hickory Road. Something is wrong. Someone is missing." Then the line went dead. When officers arrived at the address, they expected a break-in or a domestic dispute. Instead, they found an empty house belonging to Grace Whitford, a 32-year-old environmental researcher known in town for her quiet routines and predictable habits. Her car was in the driveway. Her purse and keys were inside. Her phone lay on the kitchen counter, still plugged into the charger. Nothing looked disturbed, and yet something felt undeniably off. A half-finished cup of tea sat on the table, still warm. Detectives began canvassing the property when they noticed a single, muddy footprint just outside the back door. It wasn't Grace's size. It wasn't even a woman's. But the rain had washed away everything else. No tire tracks. No trail. Nothing they could follow. The footprint felt like a taunt, a sign someone had been there, then vanished. By morning, the disappearance had spread across the town. Grace was well respected, the type of person who showed up early to work and always returned calls. People couldn't imagine her leaving without telling anyone. Her co-workers added pressure to the investigation when they reported that Grace had been tense the week before, mentioning she was seeing something unusual in a project she refused to explain. She brushed off questions, but her behavior suggested more than stress. It suggested fear. Detective Marcus Hale, assigned to lead the case, quickly realized that nothing about the scene made sense. There were no signs of forced entry. No signs of a struggle. Not a single camera in the neighborhood captured anything out of place. It was as if Grace had walked into thin air. Hale dug deeper and uncovered a detail that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Grace had been looking into land acquisition disputes tied to a long-abandoned industrial site outside town. The site had been the center of legal battles years earlier, but the case had gone cold until Grace started asking questions. 2 days into the disappearance, Hale received the call that shifted the investigation from confusing to alarming. A local hiker had found something in the woods behind the old Whitford family property, an area Grace rarely visited. Hale arrived on the scene expecting nothing more than discarded trash or an animal trail. Instead, they discovered a backpack, Grace's backpack, neatly placed beneath a fallen tree. Inside were notebooks filled with research notes. But one page stood out. A sentence was written at the top, underlined twice. "If anything happens to me, it wasn't an accident." And beneath it, a second line, written in a different ink, in a different handwriting. "Stop digging." That was the moment Detective Hale realized Grace hadn't just disappeared. Someone wanted her silence. And they were willing to do anything to keep it. The trail they weren't supposed to follow. Detective Marcus Hale stared at the 2 lines scrawled across Grace Whitford's notebook page. The first was her handwriting, tight, neat, deliberate. The second was larger, almost rushed, the kind of handwriting someone uses when they don't expect to be caught. Hale sealed the notebook in an evidence bag, but the message echoed louder than anything he'd found so far. Grace wasn't paranoid. Someone had been watching her. Someone close enough to get access to her things. As the investigation expanded, Hale ordered a deeper look into Grace's recent work. She had been investigating environmental irregularities tied to the abandoned industrial site on Wexler Road, a place shuttered decades earlier after financial misconduct allegations. Official reports claimed nothing hazardous was ever found. But Grace's notes told a different story. She listed missing documents, unexplained deliveries made to the site long after it had closed, and several names connected to a company that no longer existed on paper. Yet Grace had written those names carefully, next to dates and locations, as if she feared those details could disappear just as easily as she might. The first major break came when detectives pulled Grace's phone records. One number appeared repeatedly, an unregistered cell phone operating out of a nearby county. The frequency of calls increased during the weeks before she went missing. Hale had the number traced, and it led to a rundown cabin near the outskirts of the state forest. The cabin had no electricity, no running water, and no signs of anyone living there long term. But Hale felt the same uneasiness that hung over Grace's empty kitchen. Something was wrong. A faint smell of old paper drew them to a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Inside were newspaper clippings about the industrial site, copies of legal files from years earlier, and pictures of Grace walking to work, leaving the grocery store, standing outside her apartment. The earliest images dated back almost 8 months. Someone had been tracking her long before she disappeared. Hale's partner, Detective Rivera, flipped through the stack of photos and stopped at one taken just 2 days before Grace vanished. A dark figure stood several steps behind her, partially blurred by motion, as if the photographer hadn't expected him to appear in the frame. He wore a hooded jacket. No identifying marks. No visible face. But what froze Hale wasn't the figure himself, it was the direction he was looking. He wasn't watching Grace. He was watching the photographer. Whoever took the surveillance photos wasn't just monitoring Grace, they were being monitored, too. As Hale processed the cabin, a call came in that shifted the investigation into dangerous territory. A local construction crew, working on road repairs near the abandoned industrial site, had found something buried just beneath the surface. It wasn't Grace, but it was connected to her research. The crew had uncovered a rusted metal box sealed tight with industrial bolts. Inside were stacks of old documents, maps, and a list of transactions tied to companies that no longer existed. But what caught Hale's attention was a handwritten note taped to the lid. "You are getting close." Rivera looked at Hale. "Someone knew we would find this." Hale didn't respond. His attention was fixed on the map inside the metal box. One location was circled in red ink. A remote section of the forest near a narrow, overgrown path. The same area where the hiker found Grace's backpack. Hale ran his finger along the map, following the route Grace had been tracing for months. Every arrow, every annotation, every highlighted location pointed toward something she had discovered shortly before she vanished. Something she wasn't supposed to uncover. And when Hale realized what she was heading toward, he felt the weight of the case shift from mysterious to dangerous. Because the final note Grace wrote in her journal matched the location on the map. This is where it all started. The truth beneath the trees. Detective Marcus Hale followed the narrow, overgrown path outlined on Grace Whitford's map. The forest was quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. Even the breeze seemed to hesitate between the branches, as if the woods themselves knew something was buried here, something no one was meant to find. Hale and Rivera moved slowly, their flashlights cutting through the early morning fog. Every step deepened the knot in Hale's stomach. Grace had walked this path alone. And someone had followed her. The circled location on the map led them to a clearing where the ground looked subtly disturbed. Not dug, not turned, more like someone had carefully tried to erase signs of activity. Hale crouched, sweeping the dirt with his glove. Then he found it, a small piece of metal buried just under the surface. When he pulled it out, he realized it was a tag with a serial number from the old industrial facility. More pieces followed: rusted equipment parts, shredded paper, fragments of old barrels. Rivera sifted through the debris and uncovered a set of burned files, barely readable, but enough to confirm what Grace had suspected. The industrial site hadn't shut down because of financial issues. It shut down because someone discovered irregular waste handling procedures, irregular enough that shutting the place down quietly was easier than admitting what had happened. But the real question wasn't why the site closed. It was why someone was still protecting the secret decades later. Hale felt it before he heard it, the presence of someone else nearby. A twig snapped somewhere behind them, then silence. Rivera scanned the trees. "We're not alone," she whispered. Hale didn't need confirmation. Whoever had watched Grace, whoever had left the notes, whoever hid the documents, they were here now, watching the detectives the way they had watched her. Hale stood. "Come out. We know you've been following this case. And we know Grace found something you didn't want her to see." No answer. Just the feeling of eyes in the dark. Then a voice came from the tree line, calm, steady, almost emotionless. "You should stop. This isn't your fight." Hale didn't see the speaker, but the tone was unmistakable. This wasn't a frantic person trying to hide. This was someone who believed they were protecting something or someone. Hale stepped forward. "Where is Grace Whitford?" A long silence followed, thick enough to choke the air. Finally, the voice answered. "She walked too far into something she didn't understand. Just like you're doing now." Before Hale could respond, a vehicle engine started in the distance. Tires spun through mud. Whoever had been watching was gone before the detectives could reach the road. But something had changed. Hale turned back to the clearing, scanning the debris again. Rivera held up a water-damaged binder she had pulled from beneath a log. Inside were old inspection reports, whistleblower statements, and internal memos, documents proving the company had silenced employees who tried to expose their violations. And on the final page was Grace's handwriting. "I found the missing file. If you're reading this, I didn't vanish on my own." The binder was enough to reopen the decades-old investigation on a statewide level. But Hale didn't feel victorious. Grace was still missing. And someone was still watching. 3 months later, as the case files thickened and the pressure mounted on the companies tied to the industrial site, a new report broke the quiet. A hiker, miles away from the original search area, found an object placed intentionally at the base of an old oak tree. It was Grace's necklace, the one she wore every day. Next to it was a note. "You're not done. And neither are we." The message was clear. The case wasn't over. Not even close. If you thought this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Subscribe so you don't miss it.